G'day, Professor Joseph Drew here. This is the second in my series of videos about why we have unsustainable local government. As some of you know, my health's taken a nosedive of late, and I probably don't have that much longer left in my career, so this is my opportunity to lay out all the theory-based, evidence-based prescriptions that we need to be doing now if we're going to avert catastrophe. So this is the next 5 reasons why we have unsustainable local government. And this one probably should have been in the first step, really, to tell you the truth. We're fulfilling wants, and then if we have any money left over, we're looking at meeting our needs. You know, if I did that as a parent, I'd be called a delinquent parent. If I was giving my kids presents and forgetting not having enough money left over to buy food or water or pay the school fees, I'd be in some serious trouble. But as a local government sector, and certainly at the state and federal government levels too, that's what we're doing, because we're being pressured by our citizens into what I call the Santa Claus illusion. It's a bit like the fiscal illusion, where people can't see a connection between what they pay and what they consume anymore. But Santa Claus illusion, I covered it in my book, Saving Local Government, is even more extreme. It's like when it's Christmas time and kids put down ridiculous things on Christmas lists, thinking that someone else is going to pay for it, Santa presumably. It doesn't matter if the thing's worthwhile or not. It doesn't matter about the cost of maintaining it, all the batteries the thing's going to consume or anything. We just demand it, we stick it on this wish list, and it turns up on the 25th of December. And that is how we've trained our communities. Yes, we've trained them to be like that over the last few decades in Australia. And it's unsustainable. All levels of government will hit financial crises unless they change the way people perceive and expect things from local government. In particular, we have to make financial stewardship front and centre of what we're doing as local governments, front and centre of electoral campaigns, and I've had videos about this before. It's quite a simple thing to remedy. It needs to be something desirable. Hey, I'm a politician and I've managed your money properly, and I haven't racked up huge debts for your children and grandchildren to give you presents that you probably don't even need or want. I've done the right thing. That needs to be something you can go to an election campaign and campaign successfully on. I've been a responsible financial steward. Number 2 for this video is being reactive rather than proactive. Most local governments are reacting to situations instead of taking that step back and planning and doing boring things like maintenance that ends up saving us an awful lot of money. And good case in point, rural roads. If you don't scrape out those table drains and keep them clear, the water pills under the road, the firmament of the road turns into squishy clay and the seal breaks. It's as simple as that. But it's not a sexy thing to do, maintenance. It's not an exciting thing to go to your community. Hey, we cleaned out the drains and all the roads this year. And that's why it's not being done. But you know what? I've had several engineer mates tell me this now. A kilometre road, if you've got to completely rebuild it because you haven't done the drains properly, is about $300,000. We just can't afford not to do the maintenance. We simply do not have the money to fix the mess if we don't maintain roads. That's an example of what I'm talking about. And it's in a whole heap of things. It's in rates. Now, the single biggest mistake that's always made is councillors leave it. Leave it for another year. Leave it for the next term of councillors. The longer you leave putting up rates, the worse the problem gets, the bigger the mess you ultimately have to face. So we need to start being strategic. We need to start planning, and we need to start sticking to our plan and doing those boring things well, because that is the difference between being a sustainable council or not. That is the difference between thieving money off the next generation or not. It's as simple as that. Next on my list for why we have unsustainable local governments are the amalgamations that result in overscaled local government. I'm not talking about every local government amalgamation. I'm not anti local government amalgamation. Occasionally you see some that make sense, but particularly amalgamations in rural areas do not make sense. I'm working for a council at the moment. I'm telling the community, look, the reason why you have the problems you have and you're being faced with this massive tax increase is that there's 30 odd countries in the world that are smaller than your local government area. Here's a news flash for the clowns that masquerade as commercial consultants and some of our former local government ministers. We do not have teleportation devices yet in Australia. So if you make a council that's 300 kilometres across one end to another, to service that council you have to drive. And any savings that might have been there, and if you've watched my other videos, you know they're not economies of scale in rural local government anyway, but even if there were, they will literally go up in smoke, exhaust smoke. Furthermore, if you look at the graph, and this graph was published in my book, Reforming Local Government, peer-reviewed, and the data is directly from the OECD, we are constantly being told that we have to amalgamate because our councils are too small. Well, this is OECD data. Here's Australia here. And you can see that there are many, many, many OECD countries that have far smaller average size local governments in terms of population. There are a few exceptions. You can see the UK and Ireland and Korea. And if you want to be like any of those local government systems, you go right ahead and keep amalgamating councils and you will have an absolute disaster on your hands, just like they have. So it is an out and out lie that our local governments are too small. It's just plain wrong. But furthermore, the most important thing for Australian local government is distance. Our services are orientated towards properties, which means you need to push the pipe through to the property or you need to drive to the property. So distance is the key thing. And if you look at the OECD data, you will see that Australia is by far and away the largest local governments on average in the OECD by a mile. As I said, it's out and out wrong to say that our local governments are too small. It's just plain ignorant. It's not borne out by the facts. And the problem is we keep getting these same clowns, commercial consultants and pretend professors and things doing these inquiries, and they come up with their one silver bullet because they've only got one trick apparently. And it doesn't seem to matter if it works or not. You screw up one state and you walk across to another state and screw it up too. But it's wrong, and you can verify this for yourself by getting the OECD data. And the other thing, of course, is we've got a bit of spin, and I think there's an incentive in regulatory agencies and local government ministers. The truth of the matter is, life would be easier if we had less local governments to deal with. So there's a, interest, a self-interest in reducing the number of local governments to reduce their workload. But it is not going to improve financial sustainability. It's a fact. I've demonstrated in so many peer-reviewed papers. It's not funny. We need to forget about it, and we need to stop doing ridiculous amalgamations that end up in overscaled local governments. So it is not all amalgamations, as I say. Some make sense occasionally, but most of them lead to ridiculous consequences, lead to tax increases 60-70% like we've seen throughout New South Wales, lead to people's lives being destroyed, businesses being destroyed, and communities being destroyed, and we just need to stop. Next on my list, and I sort of touched on it in the last list too, but it's such an important point that it needs to be dealt with separately, is the fact that we are not pricing private goods and services correctly. The typical local government good or service was priced when it was introduced 20, 30, 40 years ago, and the council's been upping the price by CPI every year. Completely wrong. First of all, if the price when you introduced it wasn't fully recovering the cost, it was wrong to start off with. Second of all, CPI is a basket of household goods and services, and changing the price of your local government goods and services by the increase in the price to household goods and services is obviously going to land you in a mess, ultimately. The only way to price things correctly is through long-run marginal costs. I've got videos on that. And the only exception to that should be is when the council considers the good is so important, so meritorious, that we should subsidise it and the taxpayers should subsidise it. And they articulate a reason for doing so, and they have goals. We'll go through this later. Because if you don't do things, you're literally putting your local government goods and services on reduce for quick sale. And then people demand more, they demand higher quality, and they whinge more as well. Price things properly and people will value the thing at what you're pricing them at. And it's more equitable, because if you don't price them to fully recover costs, what you're doing is forcing the ratepayer, the taxpayer, to subsidise someone else's consumption, which is just plain wrong, inequitable. And the other thing I always note to councils is most fees and services, if you're hard up, you can't afford it, you can avoid it. Rates you can't afford, you can't avoid. So if you're not pricing local government goods and services, you're significantly impacting people with hardship. A lot of councils don't want to price goods and services properly because they think people won't be able to afford it, and that's a bad thing. What they're not doing is joining the dots and thinking it all the way through. If you don't price it properly, you're asking everyone else to subsidise it by paying more rates. And people who are under hardship paying the rates can't avoid that, and you're actually causing more pain. It's only reasonable that people consuming a good pay the full cost for producing the good, unless it's a merit good, as we discussed. And that brings me to my last point for this video: poorly articulated and designed subsidies. If we're going to have subsidies, what we need to be doing is clearly articulating in a public document, what is this great merit that warrants the taxpayers subsidising the consumption of someone else? Why is this so meritorious? We should then set a goal for the level of consumption that we want to elicit from this subsidy. We should then measure that goal, and we should have a date on there when we will review the thing to make sure the subsidy is still reasonable given how cultural and demographic changes have occurred over that time. What happens with subsidies? We set them with no goal and we forget them. And we subsidise a huge range of local government goods and services. No one understands why. No one knows whether the subsidy is actually achieving anything or not. And we never look at it. And it just gets forgotten and increased by CPI every year. We have to get the basics right, and pricing goods and services is a basic. If you were in business and you weren't pricing your goods and services properly, you wouldn't have a business. And shortly, some councils won't have a council. As I said, getting close to the end of my career, and it's time for some straight talking because things aren't changing. I know there's some inquiries starting in different states. I know some of them are already engaged the same commercial consultant clowns that we've always engaged, and they've come up with the same stupid ideas that they've always come up with, and the communities in those states will suffer. We need to start getting evidence-based recommendations backed up by empirical evidence, backed up by robust theory. In these videos, I'm not going through the evidence and the theory. You can find them in my books and my 85 papers if you want to, or I can talk to your council directly and provide evidence to support what I'm saying here. Look, if you're concerned about local government like I am, do me a favour, send this video on to someone. If you don't help me, if I don't get more subscribers, if people aren't watching these videos, we're not going to improve things for anyone. We all have to work together. This is not about me, this is about the local government sector, and if you're part of it and you care about it like I do, give us a hand. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.